Politics Show with Bernard Ponsonby.
Hello, good morning, and a warm welcome to the Go Radio Politics Show. On today's programme, in a week when the Lord Advocate Dorothy Bain has been under sustained attack, is it time to redefine her role? Can the office prosecute crime and be the government's legal advisor at the same time? Another week and another report warning of difficult spending choices ahead for the Scottish Parliament. Are we headed for a post-election financial nightmare? And it's that time of year when worried households get nervous as their council set tax increases for the coming year. Are inflation-busting rises now the new norm, all adding to the cost of living crisis? That's all ahead in the next hour in the company of my guests, who today are, for the SNP, Ivan McKee MSP, the Public Finance Minister at Holyrood. For Scottish Labour, Councillor Joe Fagan, the leader of South Lanarkshire Council. And for the Scottish Liberal Democrat, Susan Murray, the MP for Mid Dunbartonshire. Well, this week it emerged that the Lord Advocate sent a confidential note to the First Minister on the charges facing the former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell. Mr Murrell has been indicted on embezzlement charges. He was due to appear in court on Friday to enter a plea, but that date has been put back to May after the Holyrood elections and potentially saving the SNP government from a damaging issue becoming a live campaign argument. Labour say the confidential note conferred a political advantage on the government, giving the SNP time to consider their arguments by tipping them off. The Scottish Tories described the situation as corrupt. On Wednesday, Dorothy Bain, KC, answered questions in Parliament, asserting her independence from government, but she looked distinctly uncomfortable being in the crosshairs of a political storm. Can she really sit in Cabinet, advise on legal issues, and at the same time lead prosecutions? Is there a clear conflict of interest? So my first question today, is it time to split the dual role of the Lord Advocate? Ivan.
We've obviously identified that needs to be considered, and we've commissioned some work, a report which has now been peer-reviewed by those in the legal profession, and we are looking at that just now to consider what needs to be taken forward. But the important point to recognise here, of course, is that it's not really up to us. It's part of the Scotland Act, it's a reserve power, and at the end of the day it will require an act of the UK Parliament in order to take that forward. And it isn't something that's been taken forward previously with that power by previous UK governments of all shades. And of course this situation has been in place since at least the start of devolution, and I'm not quite sure what the arrangement was before that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I take that point about the changes that would need to take place in order to split this function. And let's not get into the sort of technical aspects of how that's done just now. But it was, I thought, quite an unedifying spectacle in the chamber this week, because people looking in on that will see a law officer who has to stand aside from government being in the crosshairs of a political argument. That if people have to have confidence in the system and confidence in the office of Lord Advocate, it's absolutely essential that they're not politically tainted. And frankly, so long as this dual function is allowed to go on, they will be tainted. It's as simple as that.
I think there is merit in what you've said, and I think that's why we've undertaken to look into this situation. But as I say, it isn't something we would be able to fix on our own. If we decided we wanted to, you would need to, as I say, get the UK government to make the necessary changes.
Susan.
So I think for me the key thing was that our MSP Jamie Green asked the question to clarify what role she was acting in when she informed the government of this indictment. And it was clear that she was working operating in the role of Lord Advocate, and she was advising the government. So from that perspective, we support her, and we do not feel that she has taken any opportunity to give any side a political advantage. But I absolutely agree with what you're saying. We would like to see the role split.
Now, one of the things she did say, Susan, in the debate is that I think that there had been notes which go to governments from time to time. I have to say, when the brouhaha come up about the note, I was slightly surprised because I just would have assumed as a matter of course that if there was a case coming up where she felt that government should be aware that it was on the horizon, I mean, not going in necessarily to the great details of the case, that is sort of par for the course. Should the Crown Office now release essentially a statement which says how many such notes they've sent over the years to First Ministers of different parties, which might take some of the heat out of this?
So absolutely, transparency is always something that we should welcome. And so I think that that would be an excellent step to take. But I also think that it's really important that governments and the wider political scene is advised and supported to make sure that there are no impediments to any charges that are being brought. The courts are allowed to operate and there's no impropriety.
Joe, I understand why it's the job of opposition parties to hold ministers to account, and that also means holding the Lord Advocate to account for the sending of this note in the first place. I think most people would think that that is a legitimate function of an opposition in a parliamentary chamber, but wasn't Labour and the Conservatives this week playing party politics with the issue? And in playing party politics, the danger was that they were assisting with a view that somehow the Lord Advocate had done something wrong and thereby undermining confidence in the office.
I think there's a distinction to be drawn between parliamentary scrutiny and some of what we saw this week, which I would agree wasn't particularly edifying and was not a good advert for the Scottish Parliament. I think if you go back to the questions that were put across the urgent question that was tabled by Michael Mara and then First Minister's questions, I think the extent to which there is a problem here for the Scottish Government and for the Lord Advocate really depends on the answers, which, as you say, have yet to emerge. I would suggest about three things. So one of them was the question put by Anas Sarwar about how do you resolve this apparent contradiction around when the terms of an indictment should become public. The second is absolutely this question about, is there a precedent for this? And if so, what are the precedents? How unusual a step was this for the Lord Advocate to take, given that she had otherwise recused herself? And then I suppose the third point is, what did the Scottish Government subsequently do with that information, if anything? And as we're here on Sunday, having the Lord Advocate been in the chamber on Wednesday, I don't think we're any further forward, and I suspect that the coming days are going to reveal if there's the extent to which there's a problem for the Lord Advocate.
But the charge, I think one of the charges that was made, that the sending of the note, and I referred to this in the introduction, conferred upon the government a political advantage. I mean, how do you make that case that it conferred a political advantage?
As I say, I think it really depends on the answers to questions which have yet to emerge. This could have been an unintentional advantage. The one point I would make, though, about the Lord Advocate and this, I don't want to say a pedestal that we put her on, but I even mentioned earlier what the arrangements would have been historically. Historically, the Lord Advocate would have been, pre-devolution, a member of one of the houses of Parliament, whether the House of Lords or the House of Commons. I think back to the war in Iraq, I think back to the Brexit debates, and I think of when you saw UK Attorney Generals coming to the House of Commons and stepping into a political arena. The political arena, I think, is quite heated just now because we're getting closer to the election. And I think that's what comes to this wider issue of what do we expect of, as a nation, of the Lord Advocate, because I don't think it...
Well, I think that I think the answer to that is, in a sense, quite simple. We expect the Lord Advocate to lead the prosecution of crime in Scotland, and the issue of whether or not that office should give advice to the government on legal issues when they sit in the cabinet, it's a dual function. Now, and Ivan in his first answer said it's not entirely in our gift if we're going to split these roles, and that's absolutely right, because this gets back to the Scotland Act. When the Scotland Act was going through in 1997, 1998, Lord McCluskey, a former Solicitor General in the Labour government in the 70s and a crossbencher, made the point that this dual function would come back to haunt the government in devolution. So there was warning signs all the way back then. Now, Ivan has sort of said they're looking at it. Susan, from your point of view, should the roles be split and then you can get on with the technicalities of actually decoupling the roles?
Absolutely. The Liberal Democrats, Scottish Liberal Democrats, believe that the roles should be split and have advocated for that for a while. And I think that what we are seeing is that things are done with the best intention, and not all warnings can be heeded at the time when we're setting up the Act and in that situation. But once we have had the chance to see how it's working and realise whether or not it's working well, then steps should be taken when things appear not to be operating in the way as it was intended.
Joe?
Yeah, no, the Scottish Labour Party, in our last manifesto, we stood in a manifesto commitment supporting a split of the dual role. And I think there is a growing consensus about that. I see Kemi Badenoch has now come out for that this week. I suppose the point I would make is that this has become topical in recent years for very particular reasons. And I do think it is helpful to maybe step back and come to that point around what do we expect of the Lord Advocate and what do we expect that role to be. This has to be about the governance and leadership of the nation and of the judicial system, and not the fact that senior people who happen to be connected to the current Scottish government seem to get arrested from time to time.
Well, let me say, again, Ivan's response, I'm going to say something sort of slightly provocative here, because I think it actually...
Unlike you, Bernard.
I think it actually goes to the heart of the issue. I mean, I have to say that I can't really get terribly worked up about this current issue, and I know that there's all sorts of allegations of this stinks and all the rest of it. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, an indictment has been served. It will come to court. If court dates are moved, that's nothing to do with politicians. Actually, it's nothing to do with the Lord Advocate either. It's to do with what the judge in a case is going to do in terms of timetabling. So there's a lot of hot air here, I think, around not a scandal or an issue. I'll tell you what was, and raised eyebrows, was the decision of the Lord Advocate to refer the whole issue of an independence referendum to the Supreme Court, because the overwhelming weight of legal opinion was that this was a waste of time, because the Supreme Court would assert what everybody knew, that this was a reserved matter, and reserved matters are reserved to the Westminster Parliament. And yet the Lord Advocate made the reference to the Supreme Court, knowing, probably in her heart of hearts, that this was a waste of time. But the effect of that was that it bought the then First Minister Nicola Sturgeon political space on the issue of the referendum. There is an absolutely classic case of politics and the law colliding in such a way that it makes the case that this dual function simply cannot continue.
Well, if you ask me the question of what should happen with the role, I've already indicated that we are looking at that. But it's interesting that, well, two UK parties here, both of whom have been in government in the UK in recent years, and Kemi Badenoch coming out just in the last few days to say the Conservatives are in favour of that. So that's three parties who are either currently in the UK government and could make that change today, or have recently been in UK government and didn't make that change, are in favour of making that change. I think that's
just to come back to
the reality of where the power to change this lies.
Just to come back to my example, because she would have given the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, advice on the legislative competence or otherwise of the Scottish Parliament to stage an independence referendum. Do you know if she had formally advised the First Minister that this was ultra-virus?
I'm not close to the details of that, no.
But she could have given a legal opinion.
See, I don't know the details of that, but what I do know is that the people of Scotland at the end of the day should have the right to decide on their constitutional future, and I think that's the most important point here.
But Susan, do you take my point here that it is not inconceivable that the Lord Advocate gave an opinion to the government saying this is not legal, and Nicola Sturgeon says, well, let's test the legality of it. I have no evidence for this, but this is what my sense of what may well have happened here. and that the Lord Advocate then makes a reference to the Supreme Court, which of course is a legal issue, but the legal issue is referred because the issue for the First Minister is a political issue, and it simply demonstrates that the absolute need to have confidence in the office of Lord Advocate, and it can only be done by separating the roles.
So we absolutely need to have confidence in the office of Lord Advocate. The question then as well, I think, is what authority the First Minister has to ensure that the Lord Advocate delivers on effectively the will of the Scottish Government. And I think that, as I understand it's a political appointment in the first place, I think that there is clearly a situation where even if the roles are separated, that does not necessarily provide a clear answer to that question. But I think that as far as the Liberal Democrats are concerned, the Scottish people have spoken. It was a once-in-a-lifetime referendum. And yeah, and what we need to be doing, absolutely, particularly with this particular Scottish Government after 19 years, is getting some change, because things are not going well for the Scottish people. Education is failing, and everybody's feeling the real brunt of the cost of living. We've got the prospect of real changes in the way that our council tax increase is coming, and
we're coming on to finance in part 2, and specifically council tax in part 3 of the programme. But just sort of sticking with this issue for the moment, Joe, I mean, can we agree that there's no conspiracy here? Because in Parliament during the week, you would have thought that somehow, with the tone of some of the contributions, that the Lord Advocate and the First Minister were in an unholy alliance, effectively to manage a court process for the benefit of the governing party. Can we agree that that's rubbish?
Well, yes, I actually think we can. But I come back to the Lord Advocate still has questions to answer.
Absolutely.
And I think this is the key point. And that's why I would draw a distinction between some of the legitimate parliamentary scrutiny that the Lord Advocate faced on Wednesday, and some of the comments that were made, particularly by Russell Finlay, which I think were baseless. There are those 3 questions. There is a clear inconsistency in the Lord Advocate's version of events and the Crown Office, a media statement issued by the Crown Office in relation to the terms of the indictment.
Yeah. There
is an issue here around precedent, which I speculate might become quite uncomfortable for the government. And that might be the reason why we are, in Sunday morning, do not have any further information from the Lord Advocate. And then there is this bit that seems to be missing, which is, did the Scottish Government subsequently do anything with that information? And I think when you have answers around that, then you're able to make a judgment about whether political advantage was conferred, whether intentionally or unintentionally or not. There is a wider point just to make, which is that I do think it is important that if there were to be any changes at Westminster in relation to the Lord Advocate, it's kind of inconceivable that that would happen without the Scottish Parliament having consented to it in some way. And I think I come back to, we want to have a mature discussion about what the role of the Lord Advocate is going forward. And that probably happens not when the news is dominated by what happens to be topical in a week like this, but when we're really thinking about how we lead the judicial system.
I think Joe's been very, very measured, more measured perhaps than his own front bench Holyrood on this issue. But I think he does make an entirely legitimate point that if the convention is that Crown Office do send notes to the Office of First Minister, and I can understand why they would do it, frankly, if that is a convention, it is incumbent on the Crown Office to say how many times this has happened, who were the First Ministers, and broadly what the issues were. Otherwise, it will look fishy if this has been just the one occasion.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is it's a regular occurrence, and that the information on that will be forthcoming to clarify and give examples of when that happens. But I think there's been a number of cases in recent years and prior to that where exactly this has happened for the very reason you've said, because the government, as you would expect, would require to know updated situation on high-profile legal cases for the conduct of government business. And in terms of who the information went on to, I think the First Minister answered that it was those who would speak on behalf of the First Minister, so that they would be aware of what the situation is, which would be normal practice.
Yeah, I think Jack McConnell has said he can't recall ever receiving of these. Doesn't mean that there might have something which has gone into the government. I think we can all agree that's incumbent on the Crown Office to clarify. Just sort of one final word on this to Susan. It's a bad situation if people don't have confidence in the administration of justice and they don't have confidence in the individual that leads our prosecution system. There is a need to take, I think, some of the political heat out of this.
Yes, and we have confidence in the Lord Advocate. She is a well-respected person with lots of decades of experience in the legal system. This has arisen because of the dual nature of the role as being the head of the prosecution service and also the chief advisor to the government. If she is to be, if that role is to actually be functioning, it's not, as has been said a number of times, it's not surprising that there has been a clash and we've ended up in the situation that we're in today, that we're talking about today.
Well, Joe's saying that this is probably going to run, and I think he's right, and it may well be in the week ahead. Some of these issues will crystallise, in which case this issue may well, in the short term, be put to bed, or who knows, depending on what's said, it may well blow it up once again, in which case we may well be talking about this next week. But we're back with Scotland's finances next. That's after this short commercial break.
This is the Go Radio Politics Show with Bernard Ponsonby.
And welcome back. This week, the Institute for Fiscal Studies produced a report highlighting tough tax and spending choices ahead for MSPs. They noted that because of the operation of the Barnett formula, Scotland's spending advantage relative to England is about to be squeezed. This all comes on top of a warning from the Scottish Fiscal Commission that the Scottish budget could face a shortfall of nearly £5 billion by the end of the decade if the trajectory of spend on things like the National Health Service and welfare remains the same. So, a couple of questions for my panellists to kick this discussion off. Do you accept the figures from the Institute for Fiscal Studies and from the Scottish Fiscal Commission? And if you do, what are you going to do to ensure that we don't hit financial Armageddon? Ivan?
Well, I think it's important to look back on this. And I've been in the Parliament now for 10 years. And I think on the Finance Committee and in government, and every year of that time, you've had these same issues arising. We're going to run out of money. It's going to be a disaster. If you look forward 5 years, we're going to financial Armageddon, black hole this, black hole that. And every year, for those years and all the years prior to that, for 19 years now, the Scottish Government has balanced the budget, which means that we've managed to control expenditure, focus on our priorities, so that it balances the amount of money we've got to spend, because we've got very little leeway. Unlike the UK government that can just go and increase their borrowing and borrows obviously a significant amount of money every month, we are very constrained by how much we can borrow. So we need to manage within that context.
My first question, though, was do you accept the figures as they've outlined them? So the Scottish Fiscal Commission are wrong in their assertions?
No, the numbers are what they are based on the forecasts that they're working on now. But if you go back 5 years, for example, and look at the numbers that were put together then and compare them to the numbers we're dealing with now, very different set of numbers, right across income and expenditure and the profile of that. And if you look back what's happened over the last years, the things that have changed that, we've had austerity, we've had the impact of Brexit. Brexit was known about, but the impact of it wasn't fully appreciated. We've had COVID in the aftermath of that. We've had Donald Trump playing about with tariffs. We've had the war in Ukraine. So there'll be 5 or 6 serious major impacts on that over that period, and who knows what the impacts are going to be over the next 5 years. What's important is that we've got visibility on what's coming up in the next 5 years. We've laid out the spending review, we've laid out the medium-term financial strategy, we've laid out the fiscal sustainability plan, we've laid out portfolio efficiency plans, we've got a whole series of measures that track what we think is going to happen based on those forecasts over the next 5 years and what the things are that we're going to do about it. And then then in the nearer term, year by year, we manage that, and it's every year we manage to balance that budget, focused on the priorities, and deal with, and even within year, even now where we are, with what, 5 or 6 weeks to go to the end of the financial year, there's still unknowns for this financial year. So you're always having to manage that either in the immediate term, the near term, the medium term, or the long term.
We'll come back on public service reform because it's right in your ministerial brief, and that may well be something which will have to be accelerated and deepened in the next Parliament. But Susan, when you see these kind of projections, it's not unfair for the likes of David Phillips at the Institute for Fiscal Studies to simply to speculate whether or not the existing, they're called free things, but they're not free because they're paid for by people. They're the spending priorities of government. But people like David Phillips speculate, are these things sustainable in the longer term? Would you be concerned that they're not?
So I think the important thing is that they are not in as of themselves unsustainable. It's to do with how the government manages the money. Since 2019, the Barnett consequentials gave the Scottish Government an advantage of 31% over the per resident over the for devolved services. Compared to what was being spent in England, that has now dropped to 26%, and it's forecast to drop further. But the Scottish Government, like every government, has to have the vision and the monitoring of its finances so that it can deliver its flagship policies. And if the flagship policies are forecast to extend beyond their means, then they have to manage. And what we've not been seeing is a government that's been managing the money that is available to it when it had, relative to England, a beneficial situation. And now we absolutely are hearing that maybe that forecast will change next year, but we know people are feeling it day to day. Services are falling, councils are not being funded properly, the NHS is asking for more money, and we need to improve the infrastructure in the NHS. And so, yes, there are challenges, but good financial management is really important. I agree absolutely with Ivan. Some of this is of our own making in terms of the fact that we should be working to be closer to the EU, and the Liberal Democrats are pushing very hard for that, to regain the benefits of being part of that single market and the revenue that brings into government. And we just have to understand that there are some factors that have come in, such as the war in Ukraine, that governments have to manage. And for Trump, it's really surprising that a country who's supposed to have a special relationship with the UK should give the same penalties to us when we're trading with them.
We'll see if the Supreme Court revisit the current round of tariffs. He's already had his wings clipped once, so maybe a second time. But Joe, on this issue of identifiable public expenditure and services in Scotland relative to England, it's a 26% advantage according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. The way in which the Barnett formula is going to work will squeeze that to a 23% advantage. If the gap starts to narrow, at some point ministers and budgets will have to take decisions. Does it throw a question mark over things? And the one that the IFS I think were flagging up was free tuition.
Well, I think, as Susan said, these are in of themselves, these can be sustainable. The issue is when you look at the budget as a whole. I think the Barnett formula, I suppose much like the debate we've just had about the Lord Advocate, we've always known that this issue of the Lord Advocate and their role has been sort of looming and unresolved since the inception of devolution. I have to say, the Barnett formula was never meant to be a temporary formula, but it does command a lot of support. And even just last year, I think the House of Commons Select Committee endorsed the Barnett formula again. It's not the only pressure on public spending, that the automatic functions of the Barnett formula they are absolutely not the only pressure on public spending. Huge demographic change. You look at public sector pay, the welfare bill, rising demand for services. And we've known this has been coming for a long time. We've known there was a demographic time bomb in this country about to go off. Do you know what it's going off just now? Well,
it's actually gone off years ago.
Well, indeed.
That's why we're in the position we're in. It actually went off years ago.
Well, indeed. I at the point of inception, so to speak. So, I think the issues that we have got here, they're not unique to Scotland. I think a number of European democracies are dealing with all these same issues. There are particular issues in Scotland because I don't think we have properly grasped the public service reform agenda. The other point I would make...
I'm going to stop you there because it's Ivan's minute, and you can certainly have a go at him if you don't like the answer. But you're the minister in charge, and this is the first time this has really, I think, been done in a serious way in the devolved era, in fairness.
So, a few things to this. First of all, Susan's right, that the Barnett thing is, the Barnett squeeze is something that's been operational because it's built into the formula, and those percentages have been coming down, you said, from 31 to 26, and it's now going to 23. So there's nothing new there, right? But I suppose people love talking about this. The counter story, the counterfactual of government manages services to balance its budget every year isn't a story, right? So people love to talk about Armageddon scenarios, what might go wrong, what we might have to stop doing, etc., etc. So not only have we continued to fund everything we've funded, we've obviously taken away peak rail fares this year, which again helps cost of living for people, helps people get to work.
In an election year.
We've been doing stuff right through the piece. We've introduced the child payment earlier in the Parliament, so things happen right through the course of the Parliament, and we've obviously increased that for babies under one up to £40. So
talk a bit more about the service reform. Now you're
Sure.
£1.5 billion is what you want to. First of all, how is that going? And secondly, because I mean, you're right in a sense that you get these warnings, and it's the job of government to manage the money to ensure that Armageddon doesn't happen. But it's probably going to be the case that the kind of stuff that you are in charge of, you're going to have to roll this out even more in terms of doing things more efficiently.
Yeah, and anyone that knows me knows that I'm not a shrinking violet when it comes to rolling this stuff out. But I think it's important to put it into context. If you look back at, you said we've not done much, you look back at police reform and fire reform, you look back at college regionalisation, you look back at what we did with integration of health and social care, all of those things, and it's interesting, the UK government is only now coming onto the police reform agenda in terms of reducing the number of police forces, etc. So there's a whole range of things that have happened over quite a period of time. We're still saving annualised about 200 million from the police and fire efficiency savings that we made a number of years ago. So things have happened, and on the preventative agenda there's been a huge amount of stuff has happened in the health service. Child Smiles, for example, reducing tooth decay in children, which has been huge savings for the health service. So there's a whole range of things that have happened. We need to do more, and we need to do it faster.
Okay, well there you go, Joe. We've had all these predictions of financial Armageddon. They never actually take place, because Ivan and his colleagues manage them well.
I will be fair and credit Ivan with his relatively recent appointment and work on public service reform. But the point I was going to make is there's 2 points really. So there's one about its importance, which is right now public spending as a share of the national economy has never been higher, other than 3 points in our history, which would be 2 world wars and the COVID pandemic. So there's more going on here than simply how much are we prepared to put into the system. We have to look at, frankly, the costs and the burdens and the legacy of austerity, and how you address rising demand, and how we get value out of the investment we're prepared to make. So now that's obviously not as high a share as in, say, other European economies. It's higher than in other Western economies, but it is high by our standards in this country. And on the point about public service reform, I could pick up that health and social care integration hasn't exactly been a huge success, and college regionalisation we seem to be now moving away from. But I will read something to you. We must prioritise expenditure on public services which prevent negative outcomes from arising. A range of consultations reviews are already underway covering particular public services. Ultimate responsibility for reform rests with the Scottish Government. I urge them to act quickly and decisively. As a society, we no longer have time for delay. That could have been Ivan McKee. That could have been me. That could have been last week. It could have been last month. It was 15 years ago. It was Campbell Christie in the foreword to the Christie Commission. We have wasted years by failing to grasp public service reform because Scotland's politics has frankly been too trivial and too partisan. And I think this is the Parliament where we have got to address those issues in a way that transcends party politics.
Susan, isn't it correct? I mean, that I always say politicians are very, very good at spending other people's money. They're not necessarily good about asking the question, are we getting a bang for our buck? I mean, I think of during the new Labour years where there was an explosion in public expenditure. And in fact, I think the initial budget of the Scottish Parliament in the first year was something like 13 billion or something. I mean, it's exploded in that time. And you say, we have all of this extra money, but do we have a commensurate improvement in our public services for all of that money? And it doesn't seem that we have. So it is reasonable to ask, are we spending this correctly?
Absolutely, totally reasonable. And I think, you talk about the point where we're getting 31% more, and yet we're still, after 19 years of SNP government, our education is declining, and we are not getting the benefit of that. Our health services, talk about, Ivan talks about the Smile initiative, but if we don't have enough dentists, then it's hard for people to get to an NHS dentist, then all of that becomes lost. And that's the situation that we're in Scotland in the moment, despite the extra money. So it's really time for change, because what we've had a lot of time, and 19 years is a long time to show how well Scotland can function as itself, run by the Scottish Parliament.
I have three politicians on this panel of the sort of centre-left Social Democrats, Liberal Democrats, whose instincts in a lot of things are similar, not the same, but they're similar. I mean, how long are we going to go on? And if you're a left of centre politician, I would have thought that the thing that gets you out of your bed in the morning is whether or not you make your society more socially just, whether or not you can lift people out of poverty and give them opportunity. And that involves spending money on doing precisely that. And every spending decision which a government takes is an opportunity cost. If you spend in one area, you cannot spend in another area. Are we going to continue to waste money on giving people under 22 free bus passes? Or indeed, I read that it's now a live issue that everybody should be getting free bus passes, because the cost of giving free bus passes is that you can't make an assault on poverty. You have got to make your priorities clear. And I would put and this is my final question to all three of you, in a sense, I think all of the parties of the centre-left have provided great subsidies for the middle classes.
Well, I think there's a number of points I want to raise here. First of all, in terms of public services, we talk about what we provide in Scotland. We've got significantly more teachers, doctors, nurses, midwives, police officers, more than 20% in most cases per head of population than we have south of the border. So in terms of public service delivery, there's a huge amount that you get in Scotland you don't get down south. A huge issue at the moment down south in terms of student loan, as a consequence of the fact that they have £9,000+ fees for students down south, where of course that is free in Scotland. And it's important because it allows students to be able to go to university without having to worry about that issue. Something that doesn't get talked about down south, but in Scotland we've already obviously done that for a very long period of time. And child poverty coming down in Scotland, going up everywhere else in the UK as a consequence of the child payment that we make in Scotland against something that doesn't happen down south. And you talk about bus travel. I mean, if you're under 22 and you want to get to work or you want to get to college, having that free bus pass is really important, right? So it's got an economic driver. It's got a climate change driver because it encourages people to come out of their cars and use their bus. And I'm an unashamedly proud user of my bus pass, and I do use it when otherwise I might have been driving somewhere. So it does have impact, and it has impact across a whole range of measures, and it's really important to recognise that. And just my final point, we're now in a position where Scotland has got higher growth rate than the rest of the UK, and that's been the case for more than a year now, going back to the period actually when the previous Conservative government was in place, and certainly the last year and a half with the UK government being a Labour government. And we've got significantly lower unemployment in Scotland than the rest of the UK, and that's been the case for a number of years now. So the economic benefit of that is starting to come through, which is really welcome.
One last word from Susan, but before we get to Susan, we'll go to the only member of the panel who doesn't have a bus pass.
Well, I think what we've got to do in this coming term of the Parliament is, in order to extract value from the public spending that we make, is we have to not just think about efficiency but effectiveness. And I think, and look at outcomes. So it is the case that actually class sizes are lower in Scotland, and spending per pupil is higher in Scotland than across the rest of the UK, but we're not actually seeing the outcomes that we want to see on the back of it. And that, to me, is the kind of shift that has to take place. In my local authority, and I think local authorities across the country where we have dealt with spending restraint that we're going to come and talk about, I do see examples of innovation. I do see examples of change in preventative healthcare. The work that we are doing was as one of the 3 Marmot pilots in Scotland. There are good examples here that we can build on in the spirit of the Christie Commission. And I just think we've wasted too long over the past few years because other matters and the political cycle just became too dominant. I'm going to speculate that this election we are maybe not going to see to the same extent some of these big retail offers when it comes to the party's manifestos. I might be proven wrong, but I have a feeling that we're not going to see it to the same extent because of the nature of these financial challenges. Final point is that none of that is set in stone. It is the case that by the end of the term we could be in a better place if we get the reform agenda right now.
Susan.
We have had more money in Scotland. The services undoubtedly can be better because of that extra funding. But we're still seeing, under this government, our NHS failing, waiting lists rising, people being treated in corridors and A&E. And so, yes, we can hear all the claims about and the bus passes and things, but unless we're also growing the economy, we're bringing in the, creating an environment where businesses can thrive. In Scotland, small and medium-sized businesses are really key to our economy and support for those. They provide the jobs. If we're getting people back into work after they've been ill, then these businesses are really important. And, so the Liberal Democrats have just secured some extra business rate relief for hospitality, and working with the SNP, we work with other people to make positive changes. But unless the money is managed properly and wastage is wiped out, the ferries are a great example of that, then we are always going to see a situation where we want more and we want to blame somebody else.
Well, let's not start on the ferries. Okay, that's the big financial picture. We're going to be back in part 3 with council tax. That's after this short commercial break.
This is the Go Radio Politics Show with Bernard Ponsonby.
And welcome back. Scotland's councils will soon set their council tax levels for next year. It's probably the one time when all voters pay particular attention to what their councils are doing. Last year, Falkirk and Orkney led the way with increases of 15%. In Glasgow and Edinburgh, the increase was 7.5% and 8% respectively, with the national average being 9.5%. This year, Scottish Borders have already agreed an 8.5% increase, with 5% likely in both of the big cities. Inflation is running at 3%. So, are councils adding to the cost of living crisis? Joe?
Well, council tax is rising. It's going to have to rise again in local authorities right across the country because of the financial pressures that they face. I won't reveal the stage that we've got to with budget talks in South Lanarkshire. I will point out that right now we do have the lowest council tax in Scotland. But the issue that I think you will find as you find out more this week and in the week after about where these big council tax rises are coming from is that you will find local authorities who are looking not just at this year's budget position, but actually the forecast into next year and the year after that, where the medium-term fiscal outlook is for a return to flat cash settlements, which are real terms cuts. And I think there is a particular issue in some integrated joint boards, some health and social care partnerships around the funding for health and social care. And I suspect when we get to the end of this period, you will find that those local authorities with the highest council tax rises are those who are effectively having to bail out their IJBs. That remains to be seen. The wider point I would make here is that local government has been chronically underfunded in this country for a long time. I think we have been subject to a level of ring fencing and centralisation and government interference that no other part of the public sector, and certainly not one that is democratically elected in its own right, would expect to be on the receiving end of. And I think going forward, we have to have not just a serious discussion about the public finances and the preventative agenda, but actually how do we respect local democracy?
Susan.
So, and I totally agree with Joe. It is the local authorities have been squeezed for year upon year upon year by the Scottish Government. They do not seem to understand that the local authority is the delivery arm for their policies. And that may be why there are so many policies sitting on the shelves in Holyrood which have not been delivered on. As far as council tax is concerned, councils are having to increase their council tax, not to do things that they would like to do, but simply to be able to keep delivering the services that they're obliged to deliver through statute. So statutory services are now at the main activities of councils. They're not able to do the nice things to do unless they can get external funding for it. The Scottish Government controls what those are by deciding what national funding they're going to give to councils for things like local transport, cycleways and walking and those kind of policies, but they are not part of the council's core funding. And again, I agree with Joe round about funding the health and social care partnerships. They are crucial to reducing costs for the NHS, making sure that people can have home care at home, and making sure that our social services, our community justice is delivered in a way that reduces costs.
Ivan, the double charge there was one of chronic underfunding and ring fencing. So you starve them of money and then you tell them what to do. And these are individuals who, at the end of the day, should be accountable to their local electorates for the spending choices.
So there's a few things there. First of all, in terms of the funding, we've worked hard to support funding to local government, and this year looking at a real terms funding increase. And if you look back historically, and Susan's party was part of the government in the UK when the English Council's funding was cut dramatically. I mean, nothing like that happened in Scotland. The scale of the reduction in local government funding that happened in England, leading to a number of councils in England effectively going bust as a consequence of that. So compared to that, councils in Scotland have been protected over the years. We'd of course like to be able to fund more, but going back to the point you made earlier, we do need to balance the budget and we do need to manage where those resources are going. There's additional funding going in. Joe mentioned the social care, additional funding going into social care in the budget that we've just passed. We're also taking measures to give councils the ability to raise funds through other measures, be it the visitor levy, so the tourist tax, if you like. They've now got the ability to raise funds from elsewhere. And there's been a concerted effort, and there's been hundreds of millions of pounds every year taken out of the ring fencing space, precisely to give councils the ability to be able to spend the money. So ring fencing has been reduced significantly in recent years.
Move it on a little bit, and because back in 2007 when the SNP were elected, we're going to scrap the unfair council tax was a pledge. We still have it. And Joe, in the previous discussion you referenced the Christie Commission and you made the point that a lot of things tend to get kicked into the political long grass because they're not what a flavour of the month with politicians. But I remember before the 2007 elections going to a press conference and listening to Mr. Butt from the Bank of Scotland give a very workable alternative to council tax. It seemed to be very progressive and very realistic and all the rest of it. And I attended that and I read my Herald that morning, but Tom McCabe, your predecessor, and Jack McConnell had kicked it into touch. So you all do it.
And yes, I have to say political parties do. That's why I'm making the point that this new term of the Scottish Parliament has got to be different. There is a consultation ongoing just now around the future of council tax, which I appreciate. There have been many consultations through the years on the future of council tax, and maybe the best time to conduct them isn't immediately before an election. But I think we probably will see something come out of that in the term that's to come. The wider point for me,
should it go? Does it need to go, or do you need a revaluation in order to meet the fairness test?
So I think we're heading towards revaluation, and I think we're heading towards more banding. The point I was going to make is that I don't think you fix the problems in local government finance just by addressing the council tax. About 80 to 85% of funding to Scottish local government is coming from the Scottish Government. When you think back to, say, the time of people who I think were in recent history, great advocates for local government, like JP McIntosh, or the Royal Commission that led to the establishment of the regional and district councils, and they were wrestling with a kind of democratic deficit, because 50 or 60% of funding for councils was coming from central government. We've just departed far too much from a proper understanding of local democracy and how the decisions that people take in elected locally, the decisions they take relate to the mandates that they have.
And Susan, does that not make the argument, if you want local accountability and transparency in terms of councils setting their own tax levels, a local income tax might be the way to go?
That's not the way that the Liberal Democrats are planning to go, but we
used to be for decades.
Thank goodness.
Well, I think that the local income tax, a land tax of some description, is more of a solution that we would be working towards or looking towards. But I think, again, we just have to get change in order to get any of that moving. This government did say 14 years ago that they were going to look at revising council tax, changing council tax, making it fairer. But we absolutely need to do that. In terms of local democracy, yes, councils should be free to set their level of council tax. For many years, over the past 19 years, the council tax has been controlled from the centre. It has been frozen. Councils have not been able to decide, to choose, to deliver the way that they potentially could deliver if that had not happened.
Ivan, we're in the last minute.
So I think the council tax phrase, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. When you do that as a measure to help people with the cost of living crisis, you get criticised for it, and we get criticised for doing that a couple of years ago. In terms of the taking forward the council tax, and I appreciate the attitude that Joe brings to this, which is that there does need to be a need for consensus. We are working with COSLA on this consultation. This should and could move forward in the next Parliament, but what we're very clear about is there needs to be cross-party consensus on this. We're not going to do that on our own. And even on the mansion tax...
We're right out of time. We're right out of time. Sorry. But thank you very much for your contribution, Ivan, to Susan and to Joe. That's it from the Go Radio Politics Show for this week. Go Radio Business Show with Lord Willie Haughey and Sir Tom Hunter is up next. But from me, from all of us to all of you, please do have a very good week.
The Go